Welcome to Mormon Land, a podcast all about the news and culture of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm Senior Managing Editor Dave Noyce. I oversee the Salt Lake Tribune's faith coverage. I'm joined again by Senior Religion Reporter Peggy Fletcher-Stack. Hello, Peggy.
Hi, Dave.
Before we start, here's a quick ask. We invite you to go to patreon.com, where you can access all the Tribune's faith coverage, podcast transcripts, and the full Mormon Land newsletter. Again, that's Patreon, patreon.com/Mormonland. And if you haven't already, follow us on Instagram at mormon.land. Now for today's show. Passion, intimacy, eroticism, arousal, sex. These terms are as much a part of God's plan in the theology of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as agency, repentance, and baptism. Yet they are rarely discussed or even mentioned, save for in hushed, almost apologetic tones among members. Such hesitancy is not found in Latter-day Saint therapist Jennifer Finlayson-Fife's new book, That We Might Have Joy, Desire, Divinity, and Intimate Love. In it, she writes, for instance, that, quote, the best sex is never hard work, good sex is easy. And, quote, the turn-on for most women is being the turn-on, end quote. And finally, quote, our bodies and sensual natures are not obstacles to holiness, but essential components of it. By setting aside cultural taboos, Dr. Finlayson-Fife shows that the bedroom is a bedrock, not just in marriage, but in Mormonism. She joins us today in studio to shed light on how, quote, soulful sex can bring couples not only closer to each other, but also to God. Jennifer, welcome back to Mormon Land.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, let's start with a basic question. Latter-day Saints seem to understand the law of chastity's warning against sex outside of marriage, but some struggle with the divine approval of sex inside marriage. Why is that?
Well, I would say a primary reason is we focus much more on the don'ts, and we're very fear-based usually in our teaching about sex. Because we have such a high standard of conduct, I think teachers and parents tend to be really anxious or see their primary goal as getting their child to the altar a virgin. And so what happens after that is maybe not their concern. I think a lot of parents and teachers also have their own ambivalent relationship to sex. I think we tend to put sexuality in an entirely different category than spirituality. And so we even, I think of sexuality as being Satan's pathway to our souls. And so we do a lot of fear-based teaching. We do give this caveat that it can be wonderful in marriage, but good luck to you. Like, we don't really have much more to
Yes, you're on your own.
Exactly.
Right.
So have you seen attitudes about sex evolve over the decades in the church?
I think so. It's a little hard to know what's what, but I certainly, when I first started teaching and showing up at different venues and so on, I got a lot more pushback and anxiety and letters written to me about that what I was teaching was a problem. It seems now when I show up at events, I have a much, much more receptive audience. I don't know if that's because who comes and listens to me is a select group, or if there's something larger happening in the church. But I think the new For the Strength of Youth manual suggests an evolution in how we're thinking about things. And I welcome that.
So are Latter-day Saint women, and men for that matter, less inclined than others not of the faith to fully embrace the joy of sex?
It's hard for me to necessarily speak to the larger culture because I haven't really studied it and worked with it. But I think the anxiety around sexuality is a very human thing. And because it's so close to our souls, I think that where religious groups tend to get it wrong is we almost, because we do think of it as being connected to our souls, we're afraid of it. And so we use too much fear. I think in the larger culture, we're more like anything goes as long as it's consensual. But in a way, we dismiss how tied it is to our souls. And so I think we struggle, whether religious or not, to find this kind of integration of our sexuality and how to be wise with it.
So talk about the role of the body plays in Mormon theology and how that relates to sexuality.
Yeah. So I think, I hope to be fair to other Christian theologies, but I think, when I was teaching at Boston College and so on, a lot of the students that were Catholic were writing in and about their anxiety about sex, and that it was really a challenge to their spirituality. And I think a lot of Latter-day Saints, of course, do this too. But I think we have a real gift in our understanding of faith, is that the body is not like a necessary evil in our time here on earth, that it's in fact part of our spiritual development, part of our ability to become like our parents in heaven, not just to be like them in their essence of being embodied, but that it's necessary to growing into a wiser being. And that's not just because the body gives us agency and the ability to act and learn and do, but because the body, to quote Socrates, is an instrument of perception. So I spend time in the book talking about how the body is actually the way that we map spiritual meaning, the way that we communicate profound meaning to one another. And so in intimate love, embodied love is very powerful. It's a very powerful way of being in relationship to another. It's a way of sharing our souls. The soul is body and spirit. And so LDS theology really does highlight this teaching and this understanding. But I think because we are afraid of the body and afraid of sexuality and all that, we tend to sidestep that really powerful belief that we have.
I mean, Mormon theology is that the body, all of it, is a gift, right?
Yes.
Is a gift. And you point out, there, for instance, there's a part of the female anatomy that's strictly there to give pleasure.
100%.
In sex,
right.
Which is interesting to me.
Right, exactly. It's something I teach. Like, the clitoris takes care of no one but the woman herself. Mm-hmm. And so, if I think we think pleasure is antithetical to spirituality. We teach that we might have joy, but I think a lot of us think it's for the next life after all the long suffering has happened. Rather than, yes, pleasure that is hedonistic, that takes advantage of someone or is destructive to us is a problem. But pleasure that's anchored in our morality is actually part of joy. It's a part of, it's a balm in a world full of suffering and difficulty. And as we grow in our spiritual capacity, that is, as we grow in our ability to know what's true, to live truthfully, to love and be loved, our capacity for joy increases. And it doesn't mean that we ever get out of the struggle of living in a fallen world, but we have a way to experience the beauty and the gift of being alive and the gift of one another. And if we live too fearfully, it interferes with receiving that gift.
Some of it comes down to language too. Members are afraid of some language. For instance, how do members misunderstand the word erotic?
Yeah. So a lot of people misunderstand it. So I think when we tend to think of I remember someone at one of my workshops saying, "Can you just stop saying that word?" She's like, "I'm open to what you're saying, but that word is killing me." Okay. So I think, I think because we tend to think of eroticism as pornography and kind of commercialized, cheapened versions of sexuality. But the true meaning of the word, eros is the root of eroticism. And eros in Greek mythology is the life force, right? It's this energetic, it is the pursuit of communion. It's the desire to reach beyond the ego, beyond our insular reality, and connect with the world, connect with divinity, connect with what we don't yet know, with another soul. And so it's the antidote to depression is when we are reaching beyond ourselves. It's hopeful. And when sex is erotic in the true sense of that word, it's life-giving. It makes us feel more whole, more deeply connected. You can certainly be sexual without it being erotic, right? Like if you go to a red light district, there's no eros energy there because it's full of despair and anxiety and an effort to escape life. But when sex is erotic, it's a way of stepping more deeply into our lives, appreciating the beauty of it, the beauty of the other that we're sharing our lives with. It's a way of cherishing our lives. And so a lot of people don't like sex because they don't like the sex they're having, because it's not just their partner. It may well be the way that they're relating to their own body and to their own pleasure, but they're not having that experience of it being expansive and rejuvenating like it can be.
So Latter-day Saints wear temple garments under their clothing. And how do you think those garments have shaped attitudes about the body? And what does that say about sleeveless garments?
Yeah. Well, those are going to be a welcome change, I would say.
We've heard that from several people.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, there's a range. I think I've worked with women. Men, I think, have much less. It's a little more like shorts and boxers. It's less of a kind of sense of inhibition. But for many women, there's the range. Some feel, I'm just wrapping God around me. I feel safe and protected and I love it. Other women, and maybe a lot of women that I work with, have a sense of like authority being on their bodies. Like, they're like something outside of themselves interfering with a relationship to their own bodies. And I think because women's eroticism is connected to the experience of being desirable, to being attractive, this interferes right at that point. And so if they feel like I can't enjoy my body in the same way, I can't express myself in the way I want to, and I don't mean out, trying to basically, lure people in. I just mean feeling attractive in your own body, feeling attractive in your life. If it interferes with that, it really can be a problem. And especially if women don't feel the freedom or the agency to make choices around that as a way of honoring their covenants, but also feeling at home in their bodies. I think figuring out what that is for them is important.
Do you think sleeveless garments will help change that?
I do, actually, because I think it's so difficult for LDS women to get dressed currently. I would say.
Just to find clothes.
Yeah,
right?
just to find clothes that are both attractive and that you can feel attractive in. There's just, it just allows a little more option, I think. And this is not about being, revealing too much of the body. It's just about simply being able to enjoy your body a little more.
Well, and think about how many years somehow the shoulders were perceived as too erotic or too alluring. And it was women's fault if, and now to say, oh, actually, no, it's okay.
And these were men making that decision, I suppose, right?
Yes, it's pretty interesting.
Well, what's kind of interesting is we tend to eroticize what we cover up. And, that's part of the argument of covering up, actually, a little bit, because it does preserve eroticism. There's nothing less erotic than a nude beach. I have a testimony of that. I've been to one. It's really like, oh my goodness, like
too much, too much everywhere.
Too much everywhere. Yeah. But I think that, but within reason, you need to be able to live your life and enjoy your life and not be always, anxious about your body.
Now, this next question may take you a little longer to answer, and you may not be able to fully answer because it's because it's a big part of the book. What is, quote, soulful sex? And how can couples achieve it?
Okay, let's start with what it is. Yeah. I would say the way I would think about soulful sex is that it's intimate, that you can really bring your full self to your partnership, that your bed is a place that you can be fully you with your spouse, and that you can enjoy each other, that you can, that it's a kind of sacrament. I think Elder Holland even spoke about sex as being a marital sacrament. And what that means is it's a place to step outside of the mundane and into a place and a space that's rejuvenating, that allows you to touch something greater. And that's not because it's mind-blowing necessarily, although nothing wrong with that, but more that it's that you move into this kind of liminal space that spiritual experience also resides in. It's a space in which you feel fully yourself in one sense, but also kind of outside of your normal experience. And when we are aroused, we are readily there. And so the body is what moves us there. This is part of the gift of the body. The body allows us to be in liminal experience, and the soul seeks it and needs it. And so when married couples are dealing with differences all the time, we're attracted to difference. Yin and yang tend to come together in sex, and you're drawn to it. It's compelling. And then you start duking it out after you get married. Like, why are you so wrong? But there's a meaningful tension there. It helps us grow. but also it's a part of good sex. The struggle and bliss is a part of a good marriage and a part of good sex. And so when you can come together and around your differences, around your attraction to one another and enjoy each other, that's really what it is. It's not taking care of needs. It's about enjoying each other in an embodied way. It's good for the soul of the marriage and the soul of each individual. But it requires the ability to be ourselves. And marriage can be challenging that way. Like, we often deal with the invalidation in marriage, of those differences by hiding, by not revealing what we really think and who we really are, or by pressuring our spouse to be what makes us feel good and asking them, in a sense, to erase who they are. And so to keep it honest is what drives our growth. Intimacy drives our moral and spiritual development. And so it's what I think marriage asks of us and from us, but it can be hard to do. It's easier to retreat and resent, or to shut down the intimacy of the marriage, both physical and emotional, and keep yourselves from something that your souls are seeking and need.
So how do couples get to that point?
Well, it's by, first of all, understanding what marriage is designed for and the value of a physically intimate relationship. And again, I don't mean taking care of a husband's needs. This is how many of my clients have learned it. And they're like, I take care of my kids, then he comes home and I have to take care of him, and I just want to sleep, right? And that's not what I mean. I mean a space to be together, that you can be genuinely with one another and enjoy each other in whatever form that takes through the body, right? And that you can be yourself there. And so, first of all, to just value that collaborative reality, to understand it, because I think many of us do not. And then to understand that it's not easy, that when you're in that conflict in the first years of marriage, nothing's going wrong. I remember in the first year of marriage thinking, everybody else is happy. What's wrong with us? Because we're struggling, we're fighting over things, trying to get John to be the right person and so on. It was hard work. But that conflict can be valuable. Now, I don't mean contempt is valuable. Contempt is destructive. But if you can understand that we're trying to work out how to make room for each other and how to use those differences to refine who we are and to become a better version of ourselves. That's what marriage does really, really well, if we'll let it, if we don't just resent it. And so it's like embracing the process, keeping our eye on the prize. I mean, that's what I think we need to better understand is, what is it that we're after? But if we can understand that intimacy is a spiritual process and that it is important soul work, that's what gets us there. And sometimes we get stuck. Right. We get stuck in meanings and we just get into control struggles and we can't see how we're participating. And that's when we need help. We need help from a therapist or, a perspective to see ourselves more truthfully, to get the beam out of our own eye. But even our partner often knows what our beam is better than we do.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we've already sort of talked about this, but what role does self-worth play in soulful sex? And also, what about humor?
Oh, yeah, both. So I would say self-acceptance is pretty important. And I don't mean that we always feel good about ourselves. It's a little different. But that I can accept, and I think this is a real spiritual act. That is to say, it's an act of faith to come to accept ourselves, flaws and all, as worthy, that we just have inherent worth. Even if our parents were not good at showing us that, even if we tend to go into a more one-down space, but that it's a real act of goodness to just have faith in our own worthiness. And that doesn't mean that we don't still have things that we can grow and evolve and change, but that we are part of a larger project as children of God, and that value is inherent to us. And the more we can trust in that, the more we can receive love around us, both from friends and people that care about us and a partner. And so I talk to women about this a lot because this is often a challenge for women, is just the act of receiving care, receiving goodness, letting yourself be enjoyed, letting yourself understand your own desirability is really good for you and good for the marriage. And our inclination is to kind of push it away and say that that's somehow a kind of virtue, but it actually creates more goodness to see ourselves as we actually are. And then humor. I would say, eroticism sexuality is weird, we just have to acknowledge it's a weird part of being human. And that's why many of us struggle with it. Because like, as a man thinketh, well, what I'm thinkething is not so virtuous. And so much of what we're playing with in sex is the polarities. We're playing with ideas that are more about yin and yang, and they're very different than maybe how we live our lives. And so to kind of understand that it's a space of grown-up play. And if we can take ourselves not too seriously, it can become sacred in this way. It's not sacred because it's serious. It's sacred because you've carved out a space to be together, to share who you really are, to enjoy each other, and to find a delight in each other and touch something greater. C.S. Lewis talks about this in his book, The Four Loves, in Eros Love, that you can't take it too seriously. And even in polarity, which he talks about, you can't take that too seriously either. You can play with it. Of course, you don't live it in real life. Because if you play in the polarity, you can actually touch something greater, something divine, something more transcendent. But you must not take it too seriously. That's how you actually get to it.
That was the thing I was going to ask next, actually. You write the lovemaking with a spouse can take on this sacred quality. You talked about transcendence and even a sense of sort of grace.
Yeah.
That obviously goes beyond the physical. It goes beyond the physical. You're just going beyond just your body.
Yeah,
right?
That's right. Well, yes, it's the body's actually what is allowing you to touch and to know something. So it's not, I think we tend to divide spiritual and physical as if those two don't go together. And that's not how I think of it. I think the material world is a part of the spiritual. Ego is antithetical to the spiritual. The self-serving, the egocentrism, the kind of fear and control. But it's actually through the body that we can touch something greater and feel it and take it in. And so, yes, it's through our embodied love that we understand divinity a little more. We understand our worth a little more. We are able to take in the beauty that's in the world to help us cope with all the dark.
Mormon Land will be right back.
Yeah, athletes sometimes talk about their body and when they're performing, and they go into a different space, kind of. Yeah. And I actually sensed this a little bit last week when I was playing tennis. Yeah. Pretty old, but I could still get to some tennis balls. Yeah. And I ran down a couple balls and got them back and I felt this like, oh my gosh, even at my age, I can still move. It was a weird feeling. And I had just read this part in your book. Yeah. So I was kind of feeling, I think that's kind of what she's talking about here.
100%. I think, I tell a story in the book of when John and I, we had a kind of traditional LDS marriage, married in the temple. Then we had a reception and a long line of shaking hands and so on. Mm-hmm. It was great, I mean, really. But then about a month later, we went to a friend's wedding, a Jewish couple, and we were dancing the hora, like holding them up over, interlocking arms, holding the couple up in this symbolic support of the couple. And it was one of these moments where I just felt the transcendent beauty of the moment because we were involving our bodies in a sacred meaning. And you could see the joy in their faces, the joy in all of the people supporting them, and how we can use the body to touch sacred meanings, to know sacred meanings in a different way. And we tend to stay above the neck unnecessarily in our faith. We're afraid of the body, but there's a richness there. Of course, we can use the body to be destructive. Of course, we can use the capacity for pleasure to undermine our souls or to harm another. But we need to understand it's not the body that's the problem. It's what we're doing with it. And so, sex isn't inherently good, but what we do with sex can make it very, very good.
So sex, lovers try to ensure that their partner experiences pleasure. So it's this reciprocal thing. The more you give, the more you get kind of thing. Yeah. Is that the highest aim in intimate encounters, to ensure the other person is having pleasure?
Well, it's not the way that I think is best to think about it. And of course, you don't want to just be taking at your partner's expense. Okay, that's never going to go well. But I also think if we're too much in a serving mindset, it also goes against our eroticism. I think it's better to understand that your pleasure and arousal is your responsibility and that your partner's is theirs. Now, that's different than I don't care what's going on with you over there. I'm just doing my own thing here. But like that I'm responsible for bringing myself there to enjoy and be enjoyed. The other thing is, it's not about serving their needs. It's about enjoying them and letting yourself be enjoyed. And so it's taking pleasure in their existence, taking pleasure in their presence in your lives. You know, like when a mother or a parent is holding a baby, she is enjoying that baby, kissing, caressing, holding, smelling. And the baby's existence is giving her great pleasure, right? She's not thinking, how should I touch this baby to give the baby pleasure? She's enjoying the baby, and that's good for her and it's good for the baby. The baby feels like my existence gives pleasure. That's what we're looking for in good sex, is that I'm accepted as I am and my presence gives you pleasure. My presence is intoxicating for you, enjoyable for you. There's a kind of narcissism in good sex, and I don't mean truly narcissistic where you're taking advantage, but there's a kind of way of enjoying and being enjoyed that reinforces our sense of our worthiness and our worthiness just for existing in all of our rawness. And so it's a challenging muscle to help people understand, because we move so much into either I'm selfish or selfless, rather than I can bring a kind of, what's the word? Like enjoyment. Like it's not greed, but like I want to enjoy you. That gives us pleasure to feel that in our partner, that they are excited to touch us, excited to be with us. There's a reinforcement in that can be really valuable if you feel like it's connected to you, not just getting something from you.
So readers are introduced in your book to several people, but the evolution, I'm thinking of you and Eloise, their sexual relationship.
Hugh and Eloise, yeah.
Yeah. Could you briefly explain your work and journey with them, where they began to where they ended up?
Yeah. So I'm just remembering all the pseudonyms in the couples, but this is the couple I talk about the most. So yeah, so they came in, she had found out that he was looking at pornography, and they had really been in a kind of one up, one down relationship where he was the caretaker and the one who kind of was the strong one, taking care of Eloise and her insecurities and her anxieties about sex. And so the relationship kind of revolved around her anxieties. And they had both grown up learning that's the way it should be. Like that good men take care of women's fears. And because she didn't like sex much, if he loved her, shouldn't ask her to be uncomfortable. Of course, there's a sense in all of that, but it was in a kind of form that kept them stuck. And so he would not reveal who he really was. He would always sort of play the part of the strong one, but he would quietly resent. And then he used that resentment to kind of justify looking at porn and, you know, in particular, just acts that he wished that they could do and participate in. And so he had sort of was in this split that he justified through his frustration. She found out, she came in, her first goal was to get him fixed and, you know, get him into some treatment programs that would solve the problem. But as I worked with them, you know, I pushed him first around his deception, that he was not being honest, that he wasn't even being honest in all of his accommodation, that he couldn't actually back up what he was really doing, and that he needed to get more aligned within himself. If he's really going to be in an intimate marriage, it requires revealing oneself. And she was on board with all that because she didn't like the deception. But on the other hand, as he was getting more aligned internally and not looking for her approval so much, it was then asking for her to step up more to create something that was coming out of the best in her, not just out of her fears. And I do think that's very much what marriage does. Now, I've worked with couples where they don't want to do that and they just want their spouse to get fixed. And so they don't actually persist. But, Hugh and Eloise persisted, and they started growing into a couple that trusted each other more, that was more honest and open with each other, and that they were both invested in creating a good sexual relationship. And this challenged both of them, actually, around what that actually meant, and was it okay to experience the level of eroticism that they started experiencing? Because then they were like, wait a minute, are other good Latter-day Saints enjoying sex like this? And are we still okay?
Yes.
And, and some fear around it, especially because it wasn't just Eloise and her anxieties. Hugh also, who had had challenges with looking at porn, had really learned this idea that eroticism is a problem, and maybe he's an infecting source. Like maybe he's the one that's going to destroy the soul of his innocent wife. And so, feeling her anxiety also made him anxious. But they started growing into being able to receive the gift of their sexuality and their enjoyment of each other, and growing into a couple that could accommodate more joy, and just a much happier couple for that.
So back up, what made you start this work as a career?
Oh, it's a great question. Well, if somebody when I was like, say 15 told me this is what I would be doing, I would have been horrified. I think I would have been like, what? But, I was always fascinated. Growing up, I heard all the time about how important marriage was, and I really looked forward to that. I loved the idea of marriage. But I saw so many couples around me who had like 10 kids between them, and they didn't seem to like each other very much. And so I just always was very interested in, how do you help people be happily married? But then as I started doing work with LDS women and seeing there was a lot of anxiety around sexuality, that's when I wrote my dissertation on it. And then the internet happened, and I saw so many people were asking me, will you teach us? Will you come and help us with this? So I just saw a need. And then that just became a problem that I wanted to help Latter-day Saints solve, because I could see so much beauty and goodness in our theology, as well as a lot of what I would call false traditions that we have accepted as gospel truths that have really been damaging and really driven a division between ourselves and our bodies. And I think made us weaker for it, or fearful, less able to trust ourselves. And I think we need to learn how to accept ourselves and trust ourselves more deeply. So it's been a very rewarding work to do, that's for sure.
So your final chapter is lessons for parents.
Yeah.
And you give lots of, interesting advice and points. But I want to talk about one about how to help children develop healthy views, I guess you could say, of sex. And let me just ask you about one. What, for instance, was your advice to parents if they're watching a movie with their children, depending on the age, but whatever, and a sex scene appears in the movie? You gave some interesting advice about what to do.
Yeah. Leap over the children and turn it off. Well,
I didn't research this movie well enough, right?
Yeah. I mean, the kids are mapping you and your anxiety. That's one thing that I do talk about a lot, is that how you're handling this moment is going to be more important than whether or not they see something, right? Because they're going to be seeing things. They're mapping, what does mom think? What does dad think? And what do they think about my ability to handle this? So, just being aware of that. Now, you may decide sometimes that you need to turn something off. It may just not be appropriate, may not be good. And you don't have to apologize for that. Especially if it's not just out of your fear. Like I've had friends who were just so afraid that if their kids even saw the covers of magazines in the checkout stand, that they were going to turn into porn addicts. So she would literally insert herself between her kids and the magazines out of a anxious panic. But in my view, because they're mapping that, it actually drives the fixation from what the idea of what is behind mom and why should I not look at it, right? But if you can be more neutral, like, yes, people tend to do this. It's a way to sell movies. It's a way to sell magazines. And it's a kind of cheapening of sex, if that's what you're viewing. It's also an opportunity to talk about it, to have more conversations around how sex can be portrayed in different media sources, and to help your kids, depending on their age, to think a little bit about it. What is the message they're giving? What do you think about that message? To help them become more critical consumers of what they're going to encounter. because they are going to encounter it. And so you want them to be thinking for themselves. And you can certainly lend your perspective and say what you think about it, but you want to try and manage your fear and the fantasy that you're going to keep them single-handedly from experiencing this world, more that your confidence in their ability to navigate it and giving them your honest views of it is going to help them best.
So last question, what do you hope practicing Latter-day Saints take away from your book?
Well, I hope that practicing Latter-day Saints and anyone reading the book can utilize it as a way to really look at where you might be getting stuck in your own marriage and your own sexual relationship, and how you might grow into someone who can love and accept more, either yourself and or your partner, and to take part in the beauty of an intimate marriage, to be more able to create that beauty there and more able to receive that beauty there. Because, to be happily partnered those are some of the happiest people on the planet, right? And so if we can utilize that challenging relationship at times to grow our souls up and to become more capable of loving and being loved, I mean, it's well worth the effort. I think you can create a space that you can be yourself and be deeply connected, and that's worth everything.
Again, the name of the book is That We Might Have Joy, Desire, Divinity, and Intimate Love. Thanks to Jennifer Finlayson-Fife.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And thanks to Peggy Fletcher-Stack.
Always a pleasure.
And to our producer, Chris Samuels. We remind you that you can keep up on all the happenings in and about the church by subscribing to the Salt Lake Tribune's free Mormon Land newsletter. Just go to sltrib.com to sign up, and we'll talk again next time on Mormon Land.